Behind me you can take and see the water that's coming over Highway 91 by the Jacob Hamblin home. That just around the corner that what you can't see is the Swiss Village townhomes. We had taken and evacuate 15 people from there this morning. That 5 has taken and been placed in motels throughout St. George by the Red Cross to be able to take and assist them. We've had flooding in 2 other homes that's down here along the Santa Clara River. Other than that, everything is in pretty good shape this time.
That flood smell. There's always a fresh flood smell. You never smell that unless there's a rushing flooded water.
course down to where those trees are right there. And then it traversed over the golf course, went around that hill, if you can see the green hill, it was on the other side, and just beyond that it flowed right along those trees. the aftermath of the flood is left at a battlefield. It's total devastation.
The little old Santa Clara that you can hardly even see most of the time, and nobody even really, they think it's just a little ditch, and it is a tiny ditch most of the time. But then you see it when it's raging, and you've got yourself a major river.
Here, I mean, this was just a park, but as you look up the roadways and see the homes and things that are lost, that's the true tragedy.
Good afternoon, I'm Tamara Lee. We have breaking news to tell you about.
Water from the Santa Boom, I mean, water and nature, just like incredible, just like boom.
At 4:30, the firemen came to our door and we took a look downstairs and found out that we had about a foot of water down there.
Last night we were out near Valley View Drive in St. George. We saw the water had already covered up over the culvert and was already in the roadway. That was around midnight last night.
And we thought we were gonna be okay, and turns out we gotta go. We gotta leave.
We had the house evacuated in an hour. I mean, they evacuated 6 houses last night in 2 or 3 hours. It was just incredible. The community support, it was just amazing. People you don't know.
About 10 a.m., one of the search and rescue members did indicate that he did see the victim in the water. It was only for a brief second, and then, but that's the only sighting we've had so far.
There it goes.
It's heartbreaking. It's really hard. It was a horrible, loud sound that I think I'll remember for a long time.
there. We've got most of them mobile homes, about 3/4 of a mile to a mile upstream. One of them has already gone into the river, been washed out, and there's 2 or 3 more that are close to being lost.
I don't think we can salvage anything. Because like I said, all the power's gone down there, our well's totally gone.
Regardless of what the engineers say, I'm telling you that optimistically, your sewer's not going to be back online for 10 days. The problem that we have is the lift stations are on this side of the river, and the plant's on that side of the river. To get everything back up and running, I got to get a line across that river. We got one of the guys from the power company to show up with his bow and arrow this morning. He shot a fishing line across the gap, then they pulled a line across the gap, and then they pulled their power wires across the gap.
Start over. We've lost everything we worked for because we don't have flood insurance because we weren't considered in the floodplain. State funds and to come in and recognize us and come down here and help us because we need help too. I know there's a lot of other things going on around the other states, but we need some help too, please.
It actually 10 years ago it flooded the park area of Creekside and did create some damage to the park, but it was not life-threatening in any sense.
Well, the first time it just came over and receded, you know, just over the original channel. 95, it came over the bank and the channel changed.
2001. And it was our dream home. It was everything that we'd ever wanted.
I think we're going to lose our house. And so with that report, I called 911 and got some help from the police department, who came over and looked at Cook's house, and they called the fire department, and they said we better get the furniture out of this house.
I had called county roads back out because it was starting to touch the road in Gunlock by then. I had a lot of news media calling. We could not get county roads out there quick enough. We had evacuated Swiss Village in Santa Clara. The river had gone all the way around the project and was probably a foot from going over their block wall. So please get us out of here. So I called the fire department to come down and evacuate them, and I came on back into town.
So we went out and started helping sandbags over at the end of things.
Relieved that morning when I got up and thought that the river looked lower. And of course now I realize that that's because it had cut a deeper channel, and it was actually deeper water, but it just appeared from my house to be lower.
And Gary Gray and I went down to the recycle center and started getting sandbags to sandbag his house.
We were a good 100 feet away from the Santa Clara, which is now called a river. It was something a teenage boy could have jumped across.
The water is halfway up the lawn.
A major gas line had broken. You could smell it all the way down the street.
On Valley View Drive.
When I drove up to the thing, I was panicked because my daughter was still in there, and I didn't know if they'd gotten her out or not. Everybody had been evacuated quickly because they thought it might blow up.
And I noticed the river water slowly coming up in height. There was also an increase in the speed of the water. As the rain kept coming, we noticed there were now suddenly rows of old dead logs that were starting to float down past us. This flood was far more devastating and more frightening. It was a larger volume of water. I have no idea about the speed. The fall line between here and Gunlock Dam apparently is a lot more than anyone would ever realize, and I would estimate the water was going 50, 60 miles an hour.
The next most amazing thing that really saved us was four-wheelers.
The waters were rising, the smell and the sounds of the waters were very impressive. We didn't take too much alarm because we've had floods here before. I think about 10 years ago we had a flood.
Went open.
Right. Because you can't fill a sandbag with one person.
People would just stop the whole work and we would just escape. You know, you'd look at everybody and they were looking at the river with all that water, and so that's when we got started bagging, you know. And mostly the day went by like that. We thought we had help. People came by, and, you know, I'm not sure. That's the bad thing. I don't know who came by to help. I can't remember anybody's name. That's the worst thing of all. I don't remember anyone's name.
I bet there were 30. Down to check on the property. I had a fireman running down the street frantically saying that the current had all of a sudden changed. The land had dropped 25 feet, and the end unit of our townhome complex was going off the edge. I said, what does that mean for me? He says, you have between 5 minutes and an hour to get all of your personal belongings, everything. He says, call a loved one, call a family member, do whatever you can, but I'm only going to give you between 5 minutes and an hour.
The fire department came to me and they said, Bob, you've got 20 minutes to evacuate your home. I went into a state of shock.
One of the things that really inspired me was the way the LDS church people were organized.
I couldn't get any of them on the phone. I don't know if the phones were out by then or if they were just all outside watching the river. But when I couldn't get them, and then at work, a crazy thing was happening. We were seeing on TV a televised real-time experience where a home in Santa Clara that they said had been built 300 yards from the river was being undermined and was falling in, and that just terrified me, just locked my heart. I thought, how in the world can anybody see this happen to their home?
But in order to get them, you have to declare an emergency. I said, I declare an emergency.
Big chunks of big tree stumps and the crackling of the trees along the way, and then we started seeing toilets and sinks and parts of houses, and finally it started to become dark, and people were putting sandbags and people were starting to move their things out, and I kept thinking, well, you know, it's still not bridging the bank, we're okay.
Such an amazing thing, and there was so much stuff floating down the river. And a telephone pole went by, people's things.
The number of logs that were increasingly going by us at a much more rapid pace. Suddenly, a lot of the cottonwood trees that were adjacent to us in the riverbed were starting to fall. Most of our neighbors' trees were gone, and 2 of our huge trees also tipped over.
The house plunged into the water. It was a scary situation.
The problem was there were no boxes. I went into the garage and began throwing the Christmas decorations out so I could have the boxes. And we had the big black plastic sacks, and we began throwing things in the sacks. We took all the pillowcases and took the pillows out and started throwing things in there.
We are evacuating your wife and children. We're trying to get everything out of your place. I don't know if you'll have a place to live when you get back.
But little by little, we could see that it was still encroaching toward my house.
And our house was 110 yards of concrete and steel.
Strangers that I didn't even ever know. We were in the pitch black. The power was out, the water was out, the sewage was out. And we were wall-to-wall people in my house with trash bags, throwing whatever they could and running out to the street and putting my furniture out there. And they said they kept staring at me saying, delegate, tell us what you want. And I don't remember any of that. So,
what do you want us to do? Shall we start moving your furniture?
They were there within 10 minutes, and there must have been 60 people. And they totally evacuated our house in 30 minutes.
The fire department said, you've got 5 minutes more. Fireman said, Bob, it's time to go.
Course and direction of the river changed and came right smack into the bank of our property.
This man came by in a van, and he came in and he said, I've got an empty van. What can I take? And I said, oh, I don't take anything. So somebody over there said, take her clothes. So they hauled all of my clothes out of the closet and put them in his van. I never did find for 5 days where those clothes were, and I slept in the same thing for 5 solid days.
Mine was primarily on those car keys, thinking I must find those car keys, and I must do it now. Within minutes, a swarm of, I would say, at least 20 volunteers, friends, neighbors, people who were out there that I had no idea who they were, came rushing in my house saying, Charlotte, and I was getting called from all ends of the house, Charlotte.
The only problem is that the power had just gone out, and so we were packing houses in the dark with flashlights.
Fire department knocked on our door and said, you gotta go, you're evacuated, and headed out the door. And we just drove around for a while because we didn't know where to go, so we drove around.
I don't know where to put it. Where do you put a whole household of things in 15 minutes? And I thought that the water would just go by it.
Again, those guys and their truck, probably saved us because...
Oh, your house will stand. Your house will be fine because you have a full basement that goes all the way down, and that wonderful foundation will hold it. We had no mental picture of how deep that river had cut.
Because you can't fill a sandbag with one person.
But still, it was a heartbreaker to be in that street and know that I had at least half and maybe more of my valuable possessions in that house. I still could not believe that my house was going to go down, and neither did anybody else, I truly think. And we knew then that the house was probably going to go. So we stood there in a state of shock and watched that. It must have taken, I don't even know truly, I kind of lost touch with time, and I'm still having trouble with that. I can remember the sequence of events, but I don't know when they occurred. It's just part of the mental process that I'm having a little problem with.
I don't want to come here tomorrow morning and see it all gone and say, how did it go? I wanted to see how it felt.
And asked her if my house was still standing, and she said, no, Bob, it went during the night. Completely homeless and helpless at that time.
So now we had my stuff, Lynn and Jul's stuff, and Bob's stuff to get somewhere else. Well, at that point, it was also scrambled up, and people were just rushing in and doing everything they could. And we were taking it to any and every house that would be kind enough to open their garage doors, and we were just shoving things in as fast as we could. I mean, here were people going down the street with washing machines and dryers and refrigerators and sofas.
And found my home was totally destroyed, but the kitchen area was still standing.
They were angels. They were just angels. They were just there when they were needed, and they were doing everything they could.
We drove to the Red Cross, and they were really nice to us. They gave the kids teddy bears, and we had sandwiches, and we watched the TV on the latest comings and goings of people in the river and everything. And
I had no thought in my life that I would be starting over at age 80.
worked. In fact, one of the sandbag walls sort of gave away and some people appeared, I don't know who they were, with more sandbags and reconstructed that one wall.
And all the ice cream that had been melting in town, they brought it all to the church and had an ice cream party for the kids that were still in town.
Is to stay in this little rented place until we heal enough emotionally to not make a decision which would equate to, I guess, after a lost love, remarrying on the rebound or whatever the term is, that, you know, when you're so emotional and when your heart is broken, you're apt to make wrong decisions.
And incidentally, the U-Haul people were so wonderful. They loaned their equipment to us with absolutely no charge and no thought.
So when we had our annual meeting in November, we announced to the people that the flood insurance was no longer in, and they had carried it for like 9 years or something, was no longer in place.
Is how are these people that have mortgage payments and other things going to be able to take care of their mortgage payment on property they don't have, or how are they going to be taken care of because FEMA is not going to give them anything of substance. And so through tremendous volunteer efforts of people coming together, Northern Utah has been very sympathetic to Southern Utah, and our own people have been giving like crazy.
And they said, it also says down here at the bottom on this policy that if it's in the 100 or 500-year plane, under no circumstances is anything covered.
Our private citizens are the ones that are suffering in here, and we need to get people back to their property. We saw the need for volunteers, people coming forth wanting to give time and machinery and everything else.
My little beagle dog, Mr. Jefferson, got out of my home, and he got trapped on a small ledge up by the Santa Clara River, and the waters were rushing, and he didn't know what to do. But a fireman happened to see him and rescued him, reached down and rescued that little dog and saved his life. And lo and behold, Mr. Jefferson's picture was on the front page of the Deseret News, and so he is a celebrity in the family.
And so this woman had called down in the middle of St. George and says, I want to help. I'm elderly. I can't go pick sandbags up. I can't really go out of my house. I can't carry anything, but I would really like to help. And I thought, what can this woman do that would make her feel like she can help? And I says, can you bake cookies? Just something come into mind because I'd seen a cookie right there, and I says, can you make cookies? And she says, oh yes, I can bake cookies. And she says, I'm going to start right now. How many do you? I says, bake what you think you can. And then here's my cell phone number. You call me when you're ready, and I'll come down or I'll send somebody down. And in here, a couple of hours, she called back. My cell phone rang. I picked up, and she says, I got 12 dozen. We went down, and here's 12 dozen cookies wrapped in cellophane and on plates. So the best delicious homemade cookies that we were able to distribute. Some of the people at our celebration got some, and some of the volunteers got some.